Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I wanted to take a little bit of a look at how different artists in art history have tried to show the effects of weather in their drawings, paintings and landscapes, and showing some of the different types of weather as well, including some of the more dynamic weather effects. Stormy days, rain showers, that type of thing, which is a little bit challenging for us because we're dealing, of course, with static images. So how do you show something as dynamic as a rainstorm when you have just a static image to work with? So we're going to look at some of the ways some artists have tried to approach these things. So the first one, well, this is not so dynamic. It's just a snowy day. It's perhaps after the snow shower. You can see there's a blue sky. There's no wind because if you look at the smoke rising up from the chimney on that house, it's just rising straight up into the sky. This painting is by a British artist called Eric Thornton Prehn. Not a well-known artist, quite obscure, I guess, these days. I don't know a huge amount about him. I say he was British, but he was born in Russia. His parents were British, and I guess they were living and working in Russia or something. And then up until the 1920s, and then he returned back to Britain. And obviously his art was influenced, or at least this painting was influenced by Impressionism. Impressionism, I wanted to include this mainly just to talk about shadows. See, if you're going to paint a snowy day, a snowy landscape, a lot of people would say the color that you need is white. That's the local color. That's what snow is. It's white. But when you look at an Impressionist painting of snow, and you can look at other ones, there's some great ones by Alfred Sisley, for example. They're using, yes, they're using white, but they're also using pink and blue and peach and different colors, yellows, especially with the shadows. So the shadows are rarely black. They're often blue, different shades of blue. And this is one of the things that Impressionism did. It used color in a different way. Prior to the Impressionist period, shadows were often just shown in blacks and greys. What the Impressionists said was, well, actually the world is much more colorful than that. And their paintings reflected that use of color. And I think the blue shadows do work very well, that sort of bluish gray. So I included this just to mention that about the shadows and the fact that yes, snow is white, but you can add in other things in there as well, just subtle hints of color. It makes the whole thing a bit more interesting, I think, and it is a very beautiful painting, and it certainly captures that feeling of a cold, snowy morning. The image on the right is, this one is more dynamic. So this is obviously a stormy day. The name of this little sketch, this little pen and ink sketch, is something like Child with an Umbrella. This is by an artist who is even more obscure, William Henry Hunt. I know nothing about him apart from his name. If you do know anything, feel free to put down in the comment section below. I like this one. I included this one because I think he really captures the idea of the child struggling with the umbrella on a really windy day. And those of us who have been out with umbrellas on very windy, stormy days know how much of a struggle that is. The diagonal lines suggest the rain coming down, and the exaggeration, the almost cartoonish exaggeration, adds a bit of humor, and it helps us as the viewer to understand that this is a stormy day. If you just had a figure holding up an umbrella, you would miss that idea of the stormy wind. We have, as artists, you have to give the viewer some sort of information that they can understand and try to understand what's happening in the picture. Another example of windy days, this one's by the Japanese artist Hokusai. And you can see someone's papers blowing away, hat blowing away, someone else hanging on to their hat for dear life. Again, there's a bit of humor in here, and it's a little bit cartoonish, maybe, the exaggeration. I say cartoonish, what I mean is cartoons are basically a combination of simplification and exaggeration. You simplify things down into just line drawings, really, and you exaggerate things for comedic sort of effects. But it works in other types of art as well. And this one, I think, works very well to show the idea of a really windy day. Another one, this one, again by probably a better known artist. This is by Constable. I like to include a few well-known artists and a few obscure artists. I think we can learn from art, not just from famous artists, but from all artists. This one, I say, Constable. And if I had to make a list of my top 10 favorite paintings and drawings, landscape paintings and drawings, this one would probably be in that list. I don't know exactly where, but it would be in the top 10. I just think he captured this idea of the rainstorm over the sea very well. In this case, he's using the brushwork, I guess slightly impasto style brushwork, to suggest the rain coming down from the clouds. It's probably done in oil, but I guess you could do this in acrylic as well. As someone who works more with either dry media or watercolor, you can't really do impasto stuff. It just doesn't work. So you have to try and use other ways of indicating the same sort of thing, the idea of the rain coming down. And in a minute or two, I'll show you an attempt I made in watercolor to sort of show a similar effect, a rain shower. Another one, again, rainy day. This is, I guess, different. It's not a shower. It's not a stormy, sudden shower. It's more a grey, overcast, wet day. This one's by Vincent van Gogh. He's using, again, sort of diagonal lines coming down to suggest the rain. And he has the guy with the umbrella. Again, more visual cues to help us understand what's going on. It is, I guess, one way of indicating the rain, and I've seen other paintings by Vincent van Gogh where he's painting rain and he's using that same sort of approach, those diagonal or vertical lines coming down. Again, it's, how do you represent the rain coming down when you have only a static image? And this is definitely one way of doing it. I like it. I think it works. It's not the happiest painting or drawing in the world, but it does get the idea of a wet, grey, overcast day. One more Impressionist painting. This one's by Alfred Sisley, one of my favorite Impressionist artists. And again, bright sunny days. I wanted just to mention again the idea of shadows. So the Impressionists were fascinated by the way the light interacts with the landscape, and shadows are a big part of that. And I say they stepped away from the idea of just using blacks and greys to represent shadows. They said shadows can be different colors. And color in general, of course, is really what Impressionism was all about. Reminds me of a story I heard John Lennon telling this story of the sort of where he grew up. He grew up in the city of Liverpool in England, and it was in the late 40s, early 50s, after the Second World War, although the UK was on the winning side in the Second World War, they didn't come out very well from the war. They suffered, their economy suffered a lot. A lot of their cities were badly damaged by bombing raids. And even in the 1950s, there was still rationing of some, I think, clothes and maybe some food as well. More luxury items were still rationed. So John Lennon was saying it was a bit like growing up in a black and white movie. Everything was just a bit drab, a bit grey. And then one day, he heard Elvis Presley singing some rock and roll on the radio. And it was, John Lennon described this as, it was as if his world suddenly lit up into full colour. He'd been living in a black and white movie, everything was grey, and then suddenly it was this burst of colour. To me, it's the same thing with the Impressionists. Prior to the Impressionists, everything was just a bit dull, a bit, lots of earthy colours, dark greens, greys, blacks. And then along came the Impressionists, and it was this burst of colour. And landscapes were just so much better and so much more interesting because of the Impressionists, in my opinion. So as I say, I had a go at indicating rain coming down, a bit of a shower. I went for more of a summer shower, and using watercolor to get the sort of diagonal lines. I scratched the paper and then painted over that, and where you have the scratch marks, some of the pigment collects in those marks and you get these sort of diagonal lines. Let's say it's a way of indicating the rain. Constable used something like this. Vince van Gogh used those sort of diagonal or vertical lines. It is one way of doing it. But I say with watercolor, you can't use impasto techniques. You have to try something a bit different. So this is just one experiment trying to indicate the rain. So it is an interesting thing in landscapes, trying to include the weather so that not every landscape is just a bright sunny day. Trying to indicate that it's a windy day or it's raining. It's an interesting challenge. Okay, well, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.